Hello, everyone. Please connect. We will wait a couple of minutes until everyone is connected, and we'll start the webinar. Good afternoon, and welcome to an ethical corporation in collaboration with Supply Shift webinar on how sustainability is changing the role of the Chief Marketing Officer. I'm Candy Telani Anton, Head of Europe at Ethical Corporation. Increasingly, businesses are realizing that small sustainable impacts are no longer enough. We need a seismic shift in how we do business and drive a sustainability strategy across all business functions. And on that note, it's my pleasure to hand over to today's discussion to Robert Young to get the discussion underway. To you, Bob.
Great. Thanks, Candy. Appreciate it. Appreciate Ethical Corp hosting this for us. And thank you to all of you who are participating today. Just wanted to give a quick backdrop on why we put this together. As we've been out working with different companies in the past, we've seen that sustainability was really the issue related to sourcing. And because we've seen consumer demand for transparency and responsible sourcing increase, it's made even a small issue seem big with the internet. So the marketing, the CMO, and the leadership in marketing have been required to take a more active role in ensuring responsible sourcing. And so that's really what we want to talk about today. Let me introduce the speakers for today. First of all, I'm Bob Young, and I'm the VP of Commercial at Supply Shift, and I will be the moderator. Our first speaker will be Annie Longsworth, who is, as you can see, the Executive Managing Director for the Social Impact and Sustainability Practice at RF Binder. Annie's a guru in whose practice is really centered on helping organizations such as yours positioning and branding in a sustainable world. So we're grateful to have her on the call. Following Annie will be Etienne White, and Etienne has her own consulting business, and she is an experienced marketing executive. So she's been in your shoes and is really working now at the intersection of marketing and social responsibility. So has some great insights to share with us today also. And then our final speaker will be Jamie Barsamantov, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Supply Shift. And Jamie's a PhD and has kind of studied it from a scientific perspective, but over the past 15 years has been helping companies to work through the issues. He's been a consultant, he provides technology, and really is an expert in helping companies figure out how to solve the issues around responsible sourcing. So with that, let me actually one last thing I would just mention is you have the ability to ask questions within the viewer. And so we'd suggest that you, as you have questions pop into your mind, go ahead and enter them in there. And at the end, we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. So with that, let me turn it over to Annie.
And actually, I believe Etienne is first. So Etienne, do you want to get started?
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
So just a quick, no worries. I was going to quickly recap the agenda. We're on to the next slide. That's okay. I can talk about with you the evolving role of the CMO, and we see that they are being pulled in different directions. There are external forces and internal forces that are pretty powerful and kind of changing and morphing that role. Corporations are now being recognized as some of the most powerful and influential societal forces. And so we see in turn then that the chief marketing officer role is radically changing. Their influence is extending. They are now starting to guide company culture. They are influencing company talent recruitment strategies, working more closely with CFOs, and creating new ways of collaborating internally. They're now even making technological purchasing decisions that might have been once exclusively the purview of the IT department. So we're seeing all this shift internally, and then outwardly, we're seeing CMOs speaking out now on broader societal issues and challenges like climate change, ocean plastics, diversity and inclusion, and gender equity as just some examples. We're also seeing the growth of the CMO personal brand, which is something Annie is going to kind of talk you through when she goes through some of this. We're seeing leaders bringing their authentic selves to work and leveraging this for the greater good of the company and the company's purpose or mission. That's a really interesting trend that we've seen. For 2019, we also predict there'll be more peer-to-peer influencing as CMOs engage not just their company, but their industry and their marketing peer group on their work. And so in short, CMOs, as we see it, are having even more impact on commerce and society than ever before. If we just move to the next slide. So while they're being asked to sort of do more and more, there is a counterpoint to this. And the counterpoint is that the average CMO tenure is still declining. It's under more pressure than ever before. And industry trends show that marketeers are most likely going to have to switch companies, and in many instances even switch industries, to be promoted into a CMO role. So this trend of quick turnover creates some ongoing volatility and concern. I want to take you through some numbers on this too. 75% of CMO appointments in the first half of 2018 were external hires, and less than 20% of CMOs who moved on from their role in the last 2 years were internally promoted. 50% took a role at a new company. We see that gender parity remains an issue too. Only 44% of first half 2018 marketing appointments were women, which is down from 46% in the second half of 2017. And it was 47% in the second half of 2016. So we're seeing external female hires have decreased dramatically, falling from 52% in late 2016 to only 42% in 2018. So this trend is concerning to us, and it suggests that companies may not be placing significant emphasis on recruiting female marketing talent. So we see these two things at play. The CMO role is shifting and expanding in influence, but at the same time, there's this increased volatility in the role. And at this time of great flux, one theme, if we can just move on to the next slide, one theme is consistently presenting itself as a solution for CMOs. And that's embracing sustainability, not just for altruistic reasons, but because it makes good business sense now, and it can future-proof both business and CMO performance in the longer term. Thank you. If we just go on to the next slide. I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about consumers and recapping where consumers are at right now. We see that consumers are demanding that companies address climate change. 62% of Americans believe it's a real problem. 38% believe they can do something, they can change a behavior and help address climate change. And 58% say the absence of government process means that companies really should take the lead. So we see a trend now that consumers are demanding companies address climate change. And then following on from that, we see that when companies do, consumers reward them, which is a really great trend. Forrester research last year showed that 52% of consumers consider themselves environmentally conscious, compared with 42% just 2 years before. And the CMO of Unilever, Keith Weed, he's transitioning out of that role, but he's been voted CMO of the Year for 2017 and 2018, said that being sustainable is not a nice to have. They are seeing that their sustainable living brands are growing at twice the rate of the rest of their portfolio and delivering more than half of Unilever's growth. So we're seeing that consumers really are rewarding companies for doing the right thing. We're seeing some complaining. Consumers have always complained. That's not something we're not familiar with. But what's interesting now is that consumers are taking on that sort of ghosting behavior that we're seeing in other aspects of their life. And they'll complain about a company and not come back. We saw that nearly half, 48% of consumers who are disappointed with a brand's words or actions on a social issue complain about it. And what's different now is that 42% walk away in frustration and 21% never come back to that brand. So we're seeing complainers, which we've always seen, but we're seeing this trend of not coming back. And then lastly, the thing that we're seeing is consumers wanting brands to take a stand. Today's consumers expect every company to have a plan that's real and deeply integrated into their business. 66% of consumers have said they're willing to spend more on goods and services that have a positive impact on the world around them. And Rick Gomez, who's the CMO at Target, believes that one of the key responsibilities of the CMO is to represent and communicate a company's purpose and values, both internally and externally. So this is, again, another example of how that CMO role is shifting. Rick Gomez continues, millennials in particular are making decisions based on what a brand stands for. We often say millennials don't buy things, they buy into things. As CMO, I think it's critical to ensure millennials know what the brands believe in and stand for. So in these trends, then, we're seeing consumers are demanding increased accountability from all brands, as well as transparency around those efforts. And CMOs that are successful are recognizing that this sustainability and the values of sustainability are core to a brand's identity. And they can also be an important differentiator and business driver in the workplace. I'm going to hand over now to Annie, who's going to take you through the top 10 traits that we identified that successful CMOs are embracing and using to drive business success. Thanks, Annie.
Thanks, Etienne, and thanks for all of you for being here. I've always believed that marketing and communication is a critical part of sustainability strategy, so it's exciting to be able to look at this from this lens of the CMO. And as Etienne said, we looked at 10 different ways 10 different characteristics that define a sustainable CMO. And I'm going to walk you through each of these briefly. You should all know that there is a white paper that has more detail on everything we're presenting today. So if you want more insight rather than just the high level we're providing, you'll have access to that. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll start with the first trait, which is the sustainable CMO embracing media fragmentation. Basically, we're witnessing a faster velocity of hyper-fragmentation within the media landscape. You can probably relate to this, many of us can, but according to Pew, about a quarter of U.S. adults are online almost constantly. We're on our smartphones, our tablets, our other mobile devices. And 6 in 10 young adults who are key stakeholder for the CMO, both from an employee perspective as well as a customer perspective, primarily use online streaming to watch TV. You can't just capture an entire audience anymore via television. There might be the occasional event, the Super Bowl, the Oscars perhaps, where you can get a sort of a mass audience, but generally speaking, those days are gone. So what this means for a CMO, the implications, therefore, are that it presents some challenges and it also presents opportunities. In 2018, Nielsen published a CMO study, its first CMO study, that examined how marketers are navigating this digital transformation and allocating resources. The upshot of it, and again, you can see more in our white paper, but the upshot is that the CMO who can embrace and adapt, be nimble in this continually shifting media landscape, will be the most poised for success. So I'm going to move on to the next slide and our second trait, which is the Sustainable CMO harnesses technology trends. We have three trends that we're really watching closely within technology. The first is personalization. I think we're all getting pretty used to having things the way we want them when we want them. And it's never been more important right now because it's such an expectation. It used to be that you buy a car and you have a choice of black, blue, silver, or white. But now you have so many variations. Ford, for example, can offer 600,000 variations of its best-selling F-150 truck. So you can really make this to your own liking in every possible way. Another example that we were looking at for this one is mobile payment company Square, which has the system for the 13 million small businesses that were previously not accepting credit cards. That just makes everything possible. Within technology, the second trend we're looking at is blockchain. It's a small trend right now. Right now, only about 8% of firms are rating the use of blockchain in marketing as moderately or very important. However, we do think this is going to continue to grow, and it will increasingly be likely to have implications for marketing, specifically around data and digital. And the third piece of the tech trends that we're looking at is AI. If you could go back one slide, that would be great. We're looking at artificial intelligence. So AI is already transforming previously mundane marketing tasks, as we all know, with great effects when it comes to things like CRM. AI is creating, learning, and applying lessons from self-directed tests with direct mail, email, and other messaging to consumers. And it's very likely going to change the way ads are targeted through the growth of things like facial recognition software. So those are the three areas we're looking at within tech. We'll go on to the third one if we go to the next slide. So this is really thinking about how the Sustainable CMO is a champion for climate via opportunities like the sharing economy. So this isn't a new one for anyone. It's probably pretty familiar. We're all taking our list everywhere these days. But as established business models are being disrupted to fit that sort of fragmented audience base and hyper-personalization experience, we're really seeing the sharing economy grow. So there's a benefit to the people. Obviously, we get to benefit from things like Lyft over a taxi there when we want it, but it also is a huge benefit to the planet when individuals and communities share. So, for example, home improvement stores are in the UK are offering household power tools that you can borrow or rent and use as a community. Lyft, Uber, Airbnb, these are all familiar ones within this trend. So I'll move on to the next one. The next trait of the Sustainable CMO is being a futuristic thinker. We see this person that he or she is an expansive thinker, getting rid of rigid linear thinking for more open systems, open-mindedness. So instead of using existing tools to solve challenges, the Sustainable CMO is looking ahead and predicting tomorrow's opportunities. There's a set of skills required here that really demonstrate how you become a futuristic thinker in this space. It's business creativity, it's intuition, and it's science. But this Sustainable CMO is keeping his or her eyes open to deep cultural shifts and new trends. They're constantly acquiring more digital skills, predicting ways in which digitization can change markets, can change relationships, and can change branding. We have a quote again from Keith Weed of Unilever that says, CFOs show where the dollars have gone. CMOs should show where the dollars are going to come from. Serving tomorrow's consumer will future-proof the company. I'm going to move on to the fifth trait, which is the Sustainable CMO is a natural-born collaborator. So instead of looking for the competitive advantage, we see the successful Sustainable CMO seeking out what is the collaborative advantage. This is an expanding portfolio of responsibilities that's really driving the need for broader collaboration, both internally and externally. Etienne touched on this a little bit, but we're seeing CMOs needing to forge even closer relationships and interactions with peers, chief innovation officers, chief sustainability officers, chief financial officers. And then externally, The CMO is really required to be the lead in helping guide collaborations among corporations, NGOs, and government entities. Within organizations or within companies too, we're seeing really interesting collaborations when companies who have typically been competitors recognize that unless they work together, we're not going to solve the problems we need to solve with the urgency required. So the Sustainable CMO recognizes we're not talking about winners and losers. With our climate change challenges, there are really only losers if we don't work together. A couple of examples in this sort of pre-competitive collaboration are Starbucks and McDonald's that are working together on finding a sustainable coffee cup, Mars and Mondelez collaborating on cocoa supply issues, Walmart and Target came together for their Beauty Care Product Summit, which is looking through the supply chain to how we can have safer ingredients for beauty care products. So the ability to collaborate with other stakeholders, both internally and externally, is a massive growth opportunity when it comes to the range of relationships CMOs are expected to build and to manage. And the Sustainable CMO has these people skills, the political capital, and the savvy to really navigate and meet these new requirements. I'm going to go on to numbers 6 through 10. I do want to encourage people to ask questions via the chat if things are coming up for you. So the sixth one is the Sustainable CMO valuing purpose. And I don't think this is probably new to anyone in this audience, but in sectors that are really heavily fossil fuel dependent in particular, companies are experiencing a declining social license to operate. This is driven by things like newer purchasing patterns, community, consumer, or employee opposition, higher capital costs, increased regulation, or limited supply in the extractive business models that they follow. So purpose serves a big purpose. It really is fast becoming not just a way to add on a layer of meaning that people can follow, but it's really a new business model and also a much heard mantra that clear, sustainable principles and practices need to be truly embedded within a business in order for a CMO and the rest of the C-suite to succeed. CMOs can successfully reposition brands for the future, but only if that core business model is truly sustainable, if the purpose is there. So today's sustainable leading CMOs are increasingly knowledgeable about climate, about its application as a source of value creation, and an opportunity for deeper connection with consumers. Even more so, they're increasingly dependent on colleagues in sourcing and supply chain management to ensure purpose is truly demonstrable. It cannot be something that only lives at the marketing level. So going on to number 7, the Sustainable CMO champions employees. So as millennials increase their numbers in the workforce, we're increasingly seeing employees value purpose over paycheck. In 2018, we saw U.S. tech companies, which tend to have that sort of younger employee base, staged multiple protests and walkouts. Amazon, Google, and Facebook were all targets of employee resistance. 20,000 employees staged a global walkout at Google, protesting discrimination on the basis of race and gender. In addition to that, in December, just a couple months ago, more than 700 employees signed an open letter asking the company to stop a project that was codenamed Dragonfly, which was Google's censored and state-surveilled search engine for Chinese consumers. What's important to note is that the language used in this letter from the employees reads, quote, "We object to technologies that aid the powerful in oppressing the vulnerable wherever they may be." So this is really a demonstration proving that employees are increasingly a force to be reckoned with. They have strong opinions and they can act locally and globally. Conversely, the other side of this, the very positive side, is that when employees work at companies where corporate purpose is aligned with their values, we see hugely positive results. Marks and Spencer observed that they have direct evidence of how sustainability stimulates interest among their younger professionals who work for them. Hewlett-Packard is another example of demonstrating how how applying purpose to employees during a time of change has major benefits. So I'll go on to the 8th trait, which is the Sustainable CMO promotes diversity and inclusion. This has been a big topic for 2018. It's going to continue to be a big topic as we see companies embrace and create change in this area. But we continue to witness a burgeoning millennial and Gen Z workforce population, making it even more important for CMOs to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into the heart of their brands. The companies that want to recruit top young talent are more likely to see success when they have created an inclusive and diverse workplace. By prioritizing diversity, CMOs will see myriad brand building benefits that complement and deliver on traditional business goals, whether that's increased employee retention rates, improved customer loyalty, benefits that cross over to the profit as well as the purpose. An example of this is P&G, which has long championed diversity, Procter & Gamble, through internal employee initiatives, and more recently through advertising and marketing campaigns. But the company realized, P&G realized, that consumers respond better when they, quote, feel seen. According to the CMO there, Mark Pritchard, he said, when you have equality, that creates diversity. When everyone is included, you get a lot more innovation and creativity. Another example that we think is really interesting of the industry changing is a project called Free the Bid. So this is CMOs opting, agencies and CMOs opting into a system in which 8%, well, let's give you some background. In 2016, 8% of commercials were directed by women. And the goal of Free the Bid was to have at least one female director included in every bid that is put out for a triple bid process. So this means that one of every 3 directors getting to work on a new ad will be a woman. It doesn't guarantee the woman the work, nor should it, but for the first time, it guarantees women a place at the table and equal opportunity in the bidding process. So I'm going to move on to the number 9, which is the CMO is authentic. So achieving true sustainability is not a simple solution, especially for a large brand with a complicated supply chain and employees around the world. I think about when Walmart, which was one of the first companies, probably now 15 years ago, to come out with their ambitions around climate, their goals. And part of the attention that Walmart received was the CEO saying, and we don't know how we will achieve these goals. There was real praise for that authenticity and that recognition that these are huge problems that will take years and years of innovation to figure out. Being honest about that progress and the times that you fail forward creates a sense of authenticity. We have a quote from Brené Brown, who many of you may have read. It says, vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. We predict that this trend of CMOs bringing their personal stories, allowing their brands to be authentic in the areas that they're succeeding, in the areas that they're failing, will continue. And it will increasingly become a point of differentiation and a benefit for the companies that the CMOs represent. And the 10th trait, we are at number 10. Please, I want to encourage your questions. The 10th trait is the Sustainable CMO sees sustainability as an accelerator for innovation. So as CMOs contend with a broader sphere of influence and an increased scope of work, the innovative ones at some of the world's leading companies are finding the lens of sustainability to be a powerful tool to simplify the complexity of the role, not to make it more complicated. They see sustainability as a business approach that can lead to success. They regard sustainability as a method to work smarter, instead of seeing it as an extra workload in and of itself, as it was in the last decade. As it relates to the CMO and the constantly evolving sphere of responsibilities, we see sustainability's value proposition in three key areas. One is in managing risk around ESG and supply chain and climate. Two, driving sales. And three, creating transformative business innovation. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie at this point, who will talk through each of those value propositions.
Thank you, Annie. Jamie here. Could you move on to the next slide, please? Just to focus on those three areas where the CMO is getting into more than they were in the past. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. Managing risk, driving sales, and creating innovation. We'll take a little time on each one of these. Some of these have in the past fit into the CMO role, and even within that they're expanding, and some of them are quite new. So let's go to the next slide with managing risk. We see risk in two ways, supply chain risk and financial risk. We'll look a little bit at each one of those. Talking about supply chain risk, traditionally supply chain risk was seen as disruption risk. A natural disaster, not enough supply, and that leading to not having goods in the right place at the right time, and that being supply chain risk. Supply chain risk has transformed over the last decade or more into brand risk. It's not just about can you get the goods to the right place at the right time, it's what's in those goods, who made those goods. Did a nonprofit or a campaigner find something 3 or 4 tiers down the supply chain that is not something your company should be involved with that you didn't know about? Those kinds of risks are becoming more and more prominent and can have an even much bigger impact on the bottom line than disruption risk. A lot of that is now becoming more proactive than reactive. If we looked in the past, risk management is meant to be proactive. The question is that everyone's struggling with: how much time and money do you spend on risk management? Justifying the cost of risk management from the perspective of protecting the brand's value is hugely important and justifies being even more proactive than in the past. Looking at financial risk, we see this mostly from investors seeing sustainability as a benefit and having a lack of sustainability being a risk. It's a kind of a must-have rather than a nice-to-have from the shareholder perspective. We see this being driven by asset managers who now consider environmental, social, or corporate governance criteria across $11.6 trillion in assets, which is up 44% from $8.1 trillion in 2016. We all know that shareholder actions have been increasing, and they just continue to increase, almost double in the last 2 years. The three issues for asset managers and their institutional investor clients that come up most are climate change, tobacco, and conflict risk. I think what's notable there is that climate change is of the top three. And that means that the CMO, from protecting the brand's image and driving the direction of what the company cares about, they must become a climate champion and not just reactive. Moving on to the next slide on driving sales. A few key points to make about how this comes into play. First is that, next slide please, consumers need to be, they see themselves as being selfish and selfless. That could be seen as a paradox, but what we mean by that is that when a consumer picks up a product, they want it to be healthy for me and healthy for the world. If they're looking at buying some electronics and it's energy efficient, they want it to be good for my wallet, good for the world. Products that do that are going to see more sales. And putting that in the mindset of the CMO is a critical piece. Looking at new consumers and new markets, attracting customers is obviously a critical role of a CMO. And the most new customers are either in emerging markets, in areas where traditionally have not bought the things that are consumed in developed markets, and also the younger generation. The younger generation being driving the consumer preferences into the future. Both of those groups tend to be highly focused on sustainable products. Surprising results from a lot of market research in the last few years showing how much consumers in emerging markets care about sustainable products. mostly from a health perspective, from an environmental protection perspective, and that being even more of a driver than the status of the brand. So having that be a kind of critical mindset for the CMO is key also. And the last piece of that, new consumers, is larger bids for contracts. An example here that HP saw a 30% year-over-year increase in sales bids from customers with sustainability requirements. So key to getting those larger, maybe government bids, government contracts has to do more and more with sustainability as well. Last key point on this slide will be letting sustainability be your story. Demonstrating that you're doing good creates interest, loyalty, and sales, which is something really hard to measure. And I'd say most folks don't take enough time to measure it because it's extremely hard to measure. A good case in point here is Caesars Entertainment. Took a unique approach to its CSR measurement model. Did some research on linking guest loyalty and spend with awareness. And they posed a basic question. If guests knew about Caesars' investment in CSR, would they spend more money at Caesars? They did studies from 2011 to 2018. And in that time span, Caesars saw a jump in brand affinity and loyalty, as well as increased sales and revenue numbers as a result of simply communicating their CSR initiatives to customers. Right? So just telling them that you're doing something had an impact on how much money they spent, which is surprising, but something that I think we all think is true, but it's nice to see those results. Last piece on creating transformative innovation. That's the next slide, please. So traditionally, the CMO would be supporting new products with, call it back-end marketing, branding, communications. Here's the new product. I'm going to figure out a way to go market it to the consumer. Now the CMO is getting involved earlier on in the process of contributing to product development. Just a few really interesting examples here. Nike, creating new material from recycled natural leather fiber called fly leather. They're claiming it's their lowest carbon footprint leather ever made in a lot of its products now, and that's kind of, has a really strong marketing component around the actual product innovation. The Impossible Foods with the Impossible Burger, big marketing around what that means and what that does for the planet to have a burger that tastes like meat, but is not, created from animal-based foods and therefore has a much lower environmental impact. Procter & Gamble formulated the first enzymatic detergent that works in cold water, eliminating the need for consumers to heat their water, saves them money, people can feel good about it. It really combines that selfless and selfish approach in that way. And finally, Tesla, which I think has been extremely successful in converting electric vehicles from this kind of dorky aspiration into something that is really cool and mainstream. So bring this all together, next slide please, is that sustainability stories rely on transparent supply chains. Everything we're talking about here is stories about what things are made of, where they come from. Consumers increasingly want to know what's inside the things that I'm consuming, who made them, were they treated well. All that relies on information. And it's complex, right? Sustainability is extremely complex. Tracing things to their source is difficult, time-consuming. And it's our core business here, right? For coffee, cotton, palm oil, greenhouse gases, labor. That's what we do. But what I want to focus on here is the requirements for this information, increasingly driven by the CMO. So what I mean by that is that I'd say traditionally sustainability stories are one-off, right? Found something good that happened in my supply chain about my products, and I'll tell a story about it. But we want continuous stories. The sustainable CMO needs a source for information that's reliable, that's consistent, that's scaled and scalable, and accessible, to have that consistent depth to draw good stories on and to demonstrate to the public that it's real. It's not just a one-off, right? That this is a real commitment and there's actual information behind it. So what do I mean by the CMOs driving the requirements for the information buildup? I'd say kind of call it phase one of transparent supply chains are the sustainability team in a company being tasked with getting the data to support a company goal, right? And scrambling to do that without the value being given or made accessible to other departments. Phase 2 of that is procurement, making purchasing decisions based on that data, right? Being a key component of sourcing decisions. And so there you would see procurement defining the requirements for what data should be collected, at what depth it should be, how accessible should it be. Now we're seeing, with the involvement of the CMO and the value of transparent supply chains for the marketing group, is that CMOs are driving the requirements. What should be captured? How should it be stored? How should it be accessible, customized, scalable, part of an industry-wide initiative? All of those are things that require, again, consistent data that is used not just by sustainability, not just by procurement, but also by marketing. So I'm going to wrap up there. We have, I think, a summary slide on the next piece. Not sure if I'm supposed to do that or if that would be back to Bob or Annie, but thank you so much.
Thanks, Jamie.
Back to me. Oh. Yeah. Is it okay if I summarize there?
Absolutely, go for it.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks to our speakers for the insights that they shared. Just a quick summary on what we've heard, and then as Annie mentioned, the points that we discussed here today are also available in a white paper, and I'm going to put up here shortly the link for that, and we'll actually put it in the chat box also, so that you have that link to get to the white paper. But just a quick summary on what we just heard. The CMO has a central role to play to ensure responsible sourcing within your organization, and being active in ensuring responsible sourcing will deliver benefits to your brand and to your business. But like all other things in a company, you can't do it alone. It's a team effort. And so working to define requirements and implement responsible sourcing best practices will enhance your brand and will appeal to your customers who are demanding transparency. So sustainability has become a powerful tool with which to differentiate your organization. So we have been getting some questions. Again, encourage you to continue to put into the question box here on the application, and we'll start going through those. Let me go ahead and start with one of the first ones to come in here. Let's start with here's the question. Why is the focus only on responsible sourcing? Surely when integrating marketing and sustainability, we should go beyond supply chain and look at markets, including innovation and new products, and community, local partners and stakeholders. So marketers should consider holistic shared value model for sustainability. Do you agree? Annie, would you comment on that one?
Sure, and Jamie may have something to add to this as well. I mean, I think the focus on this particular conversation is on supply chain and responsible sourcing, because we felt that it was an underappreciated part of the sustainability story. I think when you look at markets, when you look at community, and you think about holistic shared value, we have a lot of conversation around that, a lot of examples of it. And I absolutely agree that that's the holistic approach that we should be taking for sustainability. But we did recognize that the supply chain piece tends to be a little bit wonkier. It's extraordinarily complicated, and it's a vulnerability for a lot of organizations. So we wanted to make sure that we were bringing that into the conversation and making it part of the conversation. Jamie, do you want to add anything to that?
That's exactly what I was going to say, Annie.
Awesome, great minds.
Great. Let me go to another question here. I would kindly ask if you can share some tips in order to promote a sustainable business that is able to make a profit. Let's start with Jamie on that one, and others can add to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, sustainable products used to be, let's call them not very sexy, right? They would be kind of, call it maybe too granola, right, to appeal to a broader public. The examples I mentioned before, Tesla, right? Tesla is a sustainable business. I think they're making a profit. I guess that changes day by day. But I think it's really combining the sustainable and the sexy, if you will. Starbucks is another great example of that. Starbucks transformed certified coffee, which used to taste bad 15 years ago, into it's a luxury good, so that can turn a profit. So combining that what the consumer who can spend a little more will pay for, combining those two things, I think is the key. Now, I'm personally a little bit disappointed around that because that leaves out everybody else, right? But I think the goal is the idea is once you get to scale, then the costs of that sustainability become almost the same as the regular market, so that everyone can afford something that might start out as a little bit more of a luxury good.
I would add to that.
Go ahead.
I would add to that. I agree with all that you said, Jamie, but just to throw some examples of the sort of less sexy products out there, when you looked at what Unilever did under Paul Pullman, and obviously Keith Reed too, but Paul Pullman came in and said, I'm not doing the 90-day train anymore. I'm not doing shareholder reporting every 3 months, because we have to work out how to make our business work for the long term, not just the next 90 days. And then they took their smaller portfolio of brands that they already had, and they put them in a little bucket, calling them the Sustainable Living brands. And they started treating those with the full kind of core purpose and values of sustainability around them. And now we see that those brands are growing 50% faster than the rest of their business, and they're delivering 70% of its turnover growth for 2017. And those are not sexy products. Those are shampoos and those are washing detergents. So I just want to say it can be done with the kind of mainstream everyday products too, but it takes a commitment.
I think, and this is Annie, I would add to this, and I'm just going back to the question, which was around tips around promotion. So honing in on that a little bit, that what we see is that people still need to understand a benefit to them that is not about necessarily sustainability. So we still have to have the basics of a product right. It has to work well, it has to be affordable, and it has to be accessible. Those things have to be there. And then you can layer in some of the thinking around some of, whether it's different packaging or the sourcing has been different, or there's the benefit to it. But we know that you've got to start with the basics, and then sustainability becomes kind of an add-on. And then I would add to that as another tip that people still want to really understand the benefit to themselves before they want to appreciate the benefit to the world. So one of the earliest examples, and sort of a classic example that we talk about a lot in my little weird circle, is the Toyota Prius, which when they first launched it was talked about as, a car that will help the climate, that will help the planet. And it wasn't all that appealing to people because they weren't that interested in helping the planet at that time. But when they realized that they could save an awful lot of money on gas by buying the Prius, then there was a hugely personal benefit to them. And the Toyota marketing campaign really switched its energy to be around the benefit to the individual who was buying it, as opposed to the planetary benefit, which was there, but it wasn't sort of the front and center brand benefit. And there's tons of examples like that. So as much as I hope that people will eventually purchase products because of the benefit to the planet, since we're all here together, right now that's not the case. They really need to understand, especially with these brands that we categorize as in me, on me, or around me, which is things you eat, things you wear, cleaning products, cosmetics. Those really need to have a health benefit or a personal benefit, like saving money, first and foremost.
Great. Let me go on to the next question. We still have a few more minutes for questions here, and I'll direct this one to Jamie. In your experience, how responsive have suppliers been to providing sustainability data and improving their own business practices?
That's a great question. I get asked that. Yes, that's a great question. I get asked that all the time. And I think it solely rests, or I guess there's two things that rest on it, and they both fall under, does the supplier get value out of providing you information? That's kind of why we actually created Supply Shift, is because we saw so many companies asking their suppliers for supply chain information, and suppliers just fill out a survey, send it back, don't get anything out of it. They can get two things out of it very easily if they got a good program set up around it. One is only responding once, right? They shouldn't have to provide this information over and over again in different formats and different ways to different customers, right? So you can make their lives easier, and that's value, right? It's a little bit of value to just streamline their lives, and not, that's like the whole, concept of survey fatigue. The second one I think is actually even better and much more important, is giving them actionable information on how they compare to their peers. So the worst is not to tell them anything about how they did. Next is to say, you got a yellow on my red, yellow, green scale, or you got 6 out of 10, but they have no idea if everyone else is a 5 or everyone else is a 10, right? So actually showing them, while protecting anonymity, how they compare to their peers at a detailed level. I've had people come to me and say, thank you so much. I went to my boss and I told him that out of all the companies that sell TVs to our customer, we are in last place on KPI 3 and 6. And that's actionable because it's peer pressure, because it's about competition. Giving that kind of information dramatically increases their willingness to participate and to provide information.
Great. Thank you. Another question, are CMOs driving the development of company purpose? Are we seeing CMOs as being the first port of call by the CEO for kickstarting a company's journey towards becoming a purpose-driven company? Annie or Etienne, want to comment on that?
Sure. I think that, this is Annie, I think that the CMO absolutely plays a critical role in developing a company's purpose. However, I don't see it as a one-person job. I think part of the value of purpose is that it's something that can really be felt at all levels of an organization, and it feels authentic. So to arrive at something like that is not necessarily an easy process. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations are arriving at their purpose through crisis lately. So we strongly encourage our clients to think about purpose in advance of what seems to be an endless supply of crisis in our world lately. So really being able to have that in place ahead of any problems and allowing it to buoy the brand and really be of the benefit that it can be is really important. So yes, it starts with the CMO potentially, but it is not a CMO only job.
I agree. And I'd add to that, it might not be the CMO that is beginning it, but definitely what we're seeing is that it falls upon the CMO's shoulders to advance it, to drive it. So CMOs now are taking that purpose story and working out how do I make that meaningful for consumers, and helping reach across with their peers within their company, with HR, for example. How do we make this a story that helps drive employee engagement? We're seeing them within their own peer groups across their industries doing, pre-competitive collaborations, and the CMOs are often driving and reaching out in that as a result of having this purpose and value story that needs to be not just communicated, but really brought to life. So I think we're seeing a lot of it fall on the shoulders of the CMO, but it's not necessarily always starting with them.
Great, thank you. Let me keep going on the questions here. Next question. I work with forest communities in Latin America and South and Southeast Asia that produce forest-based products. For consumers and companies, is there a differentiation between social, economic, and environmental impact on producers? Jimmy, you want to kick that one off and then others comment?
I don't think that there should be a difference. I think that these things need to be combined. If you're only asking a farmer to, apply less fertilizer, but you're not helping them maintain their yield or increase your yield, you're doing them a disservice. We have a really great case study on this with S&D Coffee, where they have a truly integrated program with thousands of farmers in Latin America, coffee farmers, focused on, environment, social, productivity. So it has to, right? Otherwise, if you're going to tell them to do things that are going to decrease their yield, well, then you're just making it harder for you to buy the product that you need, right? So it's got to be multi-pronged.
I guess, this is Danny, I would add to this and maybe ask for a clarification about the question, because in thinking through what is there a differentiation among social, economic, and environmental impacts? I mean, of course there's a differentiation, but in the I guess you're asking if it's a perceptual differentiation. And I would take it into another example. We work closely with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and for that industry, understanding the social conditions of garment workers is really important to most consumers, and also how their clothing is made, which would be the environmental impact, is important. So it's not that one trumps the other or is more important than the other, but both and all are really important to understand.
I would add to that just briefly, having worked on both the marketing side of things, but also having worked with the Forest Stewardship Council, with Rainforest Alliance certification schemes too. I think that certification is a wonderful way to say we've checked off the environmental and the social, and there are great stories that can be told with that. But if you are the producer on the ground, oftentimes it's really hard and cost prohibitive to kind of reach this gold standard that certification wants you to reach across all of these things. So one of the things that we are seeing is companies now creating their own schemes and kind of customizing them, so that, of course, you have room for continuous improvement in there. But if mitigating against climate change and sustainable agriculture is more of a priority for your company and, frankly, easier to achieve, then you can focus on that. And so we're seeing things like the Sustainable Agriculture Network now has, a kind of standard that you can create and customize for yourselves. And I think that's serving people that can do more on the social, but maybe not the environmental right away, and conversely, for others with other needs. So I think there's flex in there for producers so you can still make environmental claims.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Could you please talk about how sustainability is woven into the CMO's KPIs, especially where tools like Balanced Scorecard are concerned? Maybe Annie, you can start us off on that one. A quick answer.
Sure. I mean, I think what we're seeing is sustainability. I think sustainability is such a big word, too. We've tried to break it down a little bit, but it really depends on which of the many topics or pillars that support sustainability you're talking about. But with some of the clients we work with, we're seeing things like diversity, equity, and inclusion being part of a KPI for leaders within an organization. We're definitely seeing meeting or contributing to achieving corporate goals around climate being part of the measurability and the KPIs. So absolutely, we see it as an integrated piece.
I'm gonna cut off the answers here. We have more questions. Sorry we didn't get to them. You'll see on this page here contact information for all of us. So if you have additional questions and like to reach out, please feel free to reach out to us. You'll also see the link to the white paper here on the left-hand side of the page, and invite you to look at that and see the more detail about what was presented. So I want to thank Ethical Corp for the event, and Annie and Jamie and Etienne for sharing their insights. And thank you all for participating. I'll turn it back to Candy.
Thanks, Bob. So thanks, everyone. It's been an excellent discussion today. Everyone who signed up to the webinar will receive a recording of today's webinar next week. If your questions weren't answered, you can raise this with our speakers and 600 heads of business at this year's Responsible Business Summit Europe 2019 from the 10th to the 12th of June in London. So please visit our website. You can see it on the slide on your screen. And finally, thank you to all the speakers for sparing the time to share their work in this exciting space. And thank you to you too for joining us. All the best.